settle in and let your breathing slow, like fog settling over an empty road at night. Somewhere far from your warm room, a forest stands in the dark, perfectly still, wrapped around the quiet ruins of Chernobyl. You think danger always announces itself with a sound or a smell or a warning you can feel in your skin. But radiation is an invisible guest, and most of the time, it feels like nothing at all. Tonight, you are going to drift through the exclusion zone in your mind, listening for the soft logic of systems, time, distance, shielding, and the ordinary human body doing its best. And if you hear the Sleepless Scientist speaking low in the dark, that is just your reminder the universe can be indifferent, and you can still rest. You arrive without arriving because the exclusion zone is less a place than a boundary drawn by paperwork, a ring on a map, a checkpoint, a sign with fading paint, and a road that no longer expects traffic. The asphalt is cracked in slow, patient lines, and thin grass threads up through the seams. The air is cool and still, and it carries the faint smell of wet leaves and old concrete. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once, then decides it is not worth the effort. You expect a warning, a buzzing in your bones, a cinematic shimmer in the air, but the night looks normal because physics does not do theater for you. What you call the exclusion zone is what happens after people leave in a hurry. Homes stay behind with curtains that learn to hang still. Schools stay behind with chalk dust settling into the corners for decades. And nature stays too, because nature does not read evacuation notices. Trees creep into courtyards, foxes cross empty intersections, and birds rehearse their songs in broken windows. It is quiet in a way that feels like being watched, but it is only the silence of fewer humans. In the dark, you imagine the danger as a creature hiding between the pines. That is the comforting mistake, because creatures have edges. Radiation does not have edges, and it does not need to hide. Radiation is not a mood, or a curse, or a ghost story. It is energy leaving matter. After an atom decides it has had enough of being unstable, an unstable nucleus is like a badly stacked tower of coins, balanced until it is not. When it shifts, it throws something out, a particle or a ray, and becomes a little more stable. The forest does not care, the concrete does not care, and the night does not change expression. Your body does not feel it because your nerves are not built to report individual atoms misbehaving. You can feel heat because heat is many, many collisions in a crowd. You can smell smoke because molecules are docking with receptors that evolved to keep you alive. But one tiny energetic shard passing through you is not a smell. It is not a sound. It is just an event. This is what makes it such a special kind of fear. Not that it is magical, but that it is patient. People left here in the 1980s for a reason, and not because they were bored. A reactor failed, and a city learned that modern systems can break in old human ways. Confusion, urgency, pride, and the kind of optimism that gets written on memorial plaques later. After the explosion and the fire, there was a second problem that did not glow in the dark. There was radioactive material scattered in dust and fragments inside buildings, on roads, on roofs, and someone had to clean it, contain it, bury it, cover it, measure it. The people who did that work were called liquidators. As if you can mop up a continent with a bucket. They were soldiers, firefighters, miners, engineers, drivers, and men who thought they were doing a short assignment. Ordinary bodies asked to do extraordinary cleanup, often with limited information and limited time. When you picture them, try not to picture superheroes. Picture tired people in stiff gear, waiting in lines, listening to instructions that keep changing. Picture the way a job feels when you do not fully understand the risk, but you show up anyway. In the zone, the system is simple and brutal and almost soothing in its honesty. Time matters, distance matters, shielding matters, and your body is not a sacred object. It is a machine that can be overloaded. You walk a little farther down the road, and the trees close in like a corridor. The silence becomes a blanket, and under it, the invisible guest keeps doing what it does. So the next natural question is plain and a little unfair. What is the invisible thing here that can hurt you without making a sound? Radiation, in plain terms, is energy escaping from an unstable atom. Sometimes it leaves as a chunk, like a tiny bullet of matter. Sometimes it leaves as a wave, like a hard, sharp kind of light. You cannot see it because your eyes only catch a narrow slice of reality. You cannot feel it because your skin is not a Geiger counter. Most of the time, exposure feels like nothing at all. No warmth spreading through your muscles. No bitter taste. No metallic scent. Just you standing in the dark, breathing air that seems perfectly normal. That is the unsettling part. If a stove is hot, you learn fast because pain teaches you like a strict parent. If a sound is loud, your body flinches before you even decide to. But radiation can deliver its message without a moment of warning. The bill comes later, when the cellular bookkeeping gets complicated. Not always, and not for every exposure, but the possibility sits there, quiet and indifferent. To keep it gentle, think of your body as a busy city at night. Cells are factories, roads, warehouses, and repair crews. Most days, there are small accidents that get fixed without you noticing. A chemical bond breaks here, a DNA letter gets misread there, and the repair teams patch it up. Life is not perfection, it is maintenance. Radiation is not guaranteed doom. It is extra damage arriving without asking. Some kinds of radiation are heavy and clumsy. Alpha particles are like a bowling ball thrown into a curtain. They do a lot of damage, but they cannot travel very far. A sheet of paper or the outer layer of your skin can stop them. Beta particles are lighter, more like fast pebbles. They can penetrate farther, and they can burn skin if the source is close. Gamma rays are the quiet, stubborn kind. They are high energy light, able to pass through your body like a rumor through an office. They might not stop until they meet something dense enough to make them care. And then there are neutrons, less common in everyday contamination, but deeply serious around reactors. Neutrons are like uninvited guests that make other atoms unstable just by bumping into them. You do not need to memorize these categories tonight. You only need the idea that radiation comes in different flavors and they behave differently in matter. Now come the three gentle levers, the ones humans use when the enemy is invisible. Time, distance, and shielding. Time is simple because the longer you stay near a source, the more events pass through you. Distance is simple too because radiation spreads out as it travels. Step away and you are giving the energy more space to miss you. Shielding is the third lever, the physical barrier that absorbs or blocks what would pass through your tissues. Sometimes it is concrete. Sometimes it is water. Sometimes it is lead, heavy and inconvenient, like carrying guilt in your pockets. The disturbing elegance is that none of this is emotional. Radiation does not become angry if you are brave. It does not become gentle if you are kind. It does not care if you have a family waiting at home. It simply interacts with matter, or it does not. And that is why small amounts over time can be manageable. Your repair systems keep up, your body replaces old cells, and life goes on. But big amounts delivered quickly can overwhelm that maintenance. Not because you are weak, but because even good repair crews fail in a citywide fire. This is why liquidators were often given short shifts in the hottest places. Minutes, not hours, like working under an invisible hourglass. Go in, do the task, come out, trade places with the next person. You might think, if it is that dangerous, why not send machines? They tried. And then the machines broke because the environment was not kind to electronics. High radiation can scramble circuits, and dust can clog anything with moving parts. Robots are brave until their wiring forgets what a wire is supposed to do. So, humans, with their adaptable hands and their disposable bodies, became the equipment. Congratulations, you have invented the oldest technology of all, a person with instructions. When radiation scares people, it is rarely because of the details. It is because it refuses to give you immediate feedback. You cannot tell in the moment whether you were lucky. You cannot feel the difference between a safe patch of road and a contaminated patch. So your mind does what it always does in the dark. It fills the silence with stories. And since it does not announce itself, you end up relying on something oddly comforting. Machines that click softly in the dark. In your hand, imagine the weight of a Geiger counter, plastic casing, a small speaker, a dial or a digital display, and a patience that does not get tired. When it is quiet here, you can hear the clicks clearly, a slow, steady tick, like rain tapping a window. When levels are low, it can be almost soothing, a metronome for invisible events. Click, pause, click. Each click is not death. Each click is not a curse. It is a count, a little electrical pulse caused by a particle or ray interacting with the detector. Inside the device, there is a tube filled with gas, held at high voltage. When radiation enters, it ionizes the gas, knocking electrons loose. That tiny spark becomes a signal, and the counter translates it into a click you can hear. It is the sound of measurement, not judgment. Humans love measurement because it lets fear sit down and behave. A dread you cannot name becomes a number you can compare. A number becomes a rule. Do not stand there. Do not touch that. Do not stay longer than this. Walk on this path, not that one. Keep your boots out of the grass. Wash your hands. Leave your clothes at the door. A click rate rising in your ear is like a flashlight beam sweeping through a dark room. Not because it changes the room, but because it tells you where the furniture is. And in the zone, the furniture is contamination that settled where wind and water told it to. A Geiger counter can be calming because it gives the invisible a voice. but it does not make choices for you. It cannot decide whether the job is worth the dose. It cannot decide whether the schedule is realistic. It cannot decide whether the person holding it has been told the truth. This is where the story gets heavier, without needing drama, because many liquidators had limited time, limited protection, and tasks that could not be paused. Some had better gear. Some had worse. Some had meters, some did not. Sometimes the meter was there, but the plan still required someone to step onto a roof and work fast. You can measure the rain, but if you have to cross the street, you still get wet. When the clicks speed up, you do not hear panic in the machine. You hear consistency. It is your own mind that supplies the meaning, the image of cells, the image of future illness. The counter just keeps counting, like an accountant who never sleeps. In a way, it is almost comforting to know that reality is not personal. Terrible, yes, but not personal. And once you accept that, you can look at the work itself, which was rarely one heroic moment. It was many small tasks, each one ordinary, each one carrying a quiet cost. A day as a liquidator begins like many days that lead to history. Not with a trumpet, but with waking up tired. You stand at a line because systems love lines. You receive instructions that try to turn chaos into a checklist. There are controlled areas and less controlled areas, and boundaries marked by signs and tape. The job might be clearing debris, or washing surfaces, or moving contaminated material into containers. It might be driving a truck along a route that has been chosen because it is less bad than the others. It might be digging because humans love to solve problems by burying them. It might be working on a roof where dust settled like toxic snow. Some of the most infamous work involved clearing the roof of a nearby building, not because the roof was special, but because it collected fragments of radioactive material, pieces of graphite and fuel scattered where they landed, each one a tiny, concentrated source. Machines were sent up there. Machines failed, so people went up instead, in short shifts that were measured like rations. A few minutes, move fast, shovel debris, throw it down into a designated area, leave, next person. The simplicity is almost mechanical. It is not epic, it is repetitive. And repetition is how human beings survive work that would otherwise feel impossible. You focus on the next motion, not the entire meaning of it. Pick up, lift, throw, step back, breathe. Do not think too hard about the dust clinging to your clothes. Protection was often improvised, and sometimes adequate, and sometimes painfully not. Heavy clothing, masks that fog up, gloves that make your fingers clumsy, lead aprons in some tasks, hanging from shoulders like dense fatigue, respirators when available, because inhaling contamination is a special kind of unwanted intimacy. The goal was not to make the work safe. It was to make it less bad. That distinction matters because it keeps the story honest. If you imagine perfect protection, you imagine a world where the job is simply technical, but the real world is logistics, shortages, and people making do. And through it all, the most important tool is the schedule. Time pressure is not just about getting things done. It is a form of shielding. If you only have a short window, your dose stays lower. So the clock becomes part of your suit, an invisible countdown attached to your body. You watch other people come back, and you look at their faces for signs of something you can understand. But radiation does not paint a clear expression on someone. Not right away. Sometimes they look fine because they are fine. Sometimes they look fine because the harm is not immediate. So you keep doing the human thing. You trust the system, or you pretend you do, because the alternative is paralysis. You do your task. You come back out. Your clothes might be checked. Your hands might be washed. You might step through a monitoring station that decides, with a number, whether you are allowed to return. And then you wait, because so much of work is waiting. Waiting for your next assignment, waiting for transport, waiting for instructions that will change anyway. Waiting in the same air, with the same tired muscles, with the same quiet clicks somewhere nearby. If you are listening closely, you can feel the true weight of the story. Not the weight of heroism, but the weight of systems asking bodies to pay for time. And this is where your mind naturally asks a calmer, more clinical question. What does radiation actually do inside you, step by step, when nobody is watching? Not in a dramatic montage, not with instant symptoms and cinematic coughing, just the quiet physics of energy meeting living tissue and making small, rude edits. You are built out of water, fats, salts, proteins, and long strands of instructions called deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. DNA is the librarian of the cell, storing recipes you never get to read. Most of the time, your cells copy those recipes with astonishing accuracy, but not perfect accuracy, because life is not a clean room. Even on a normal day, your cells make mistakes. Sunlight nicks your skin cells. Oxygen, the molecule that keeps you alive, also rusts you from the inside. Chemicals bump, bonds break, and your body shrugs and repairs. That is what being alive means. You are not a statue. You are a maintenance project with a pulse. Radiation is just another source of damage, except it arrives like a vandal you cannot see. When a gamma ray passes through you, it does not politely stop at the door. It can cross tissue and, by chance, strike an atom. If that atom is part of your DNA, congratulations, you have received unwanted correspondence. The ray can knock an electron loose. That creates an ion, a charged piece of matter that is suddenly reactive. In human language, it creates chemical chaos where chemical order was keeping you intact. Sometimes the damage is direct, a hit to the DNA backbone. Sometimes it is indirect, and that is the more common route. Because you are mostly water, radiation often hits water first. Water splits into reactive fragments, like hydroxyl radicals. They are tiny, aggressive, short-lived troublemakers. They bounce into nearby molecules, stealing electrons, breaking bonds, leaving dents. This is why radiation is called ionizing. It does not poison you like a toxin. It rearranges you, one microscopic collision at a time. Now, here is the part that is almost comforting. Your cells have repair crews, several kinds with different specialties, like tradespeople who never clock out. There are enzymes that find broken strands and stitch them back together. There are proteins that scan for mismatched letters and swap them out. There are checkpoints that stop the cell cycle, like a stern manager saying, "Not yet." And when a cell is too damaged, there is a self-destruct system. Apoptosis is the term. and it means the cell politely dismantles itself. No screaming, no leaking mess. Just a quiet exit so the tissue can replace it. Your body does this constantly. Right now, even as you lie still, some of your cells are deciding to die on purpose. It is not tragic. It is housekeeping. This is why not every exposure becomes an illness. Most hits are repaired, many damaged cells are removed, and many tissues renew quickly anyway, so losses are absorbed. Your skin sheds, your gut lining replaces itself, your blood cells are born, mature, and retire on schedule. Life is built to handle insult. But the repair shop has limits. If the damage arrives faster than it can be handled, mistakes slip through, and a mistake in DNA can be harmless. Or it can change how a cell behaves. Sometimes it makes a cell stop dividing. Sometimes it makes a cell die early. And sometimes, in the worst lotteries, it nudges a cell toward uncontrolled division. That is the quiet seed of cancer. Not a creature, not a curse, just a cell that forgot the rules. The scary part is the delay. Cancer can take years to show itself because biology is patient. The less scary part is that risk is not destiny. Dose matters, timing matters, tissue matters, and randomness matters. Your bone marrow is more vulnerable than your teeth. Your gut lining is more sensitive than your tendons. Cells that divide often have more chances to copy a mistake. Cells that rarely divide are sometimes spared, at least at first. When people talk about acute radiation sickness, they mean higher doses delivered quickly. That is when your repair crews are overwhelmed in days, not years. The earliest effects are often nausea and fatigue because the body is reacting to widespread cellular stress. The gut can be hit hard because it is constantly renewing, so you get vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration, and a body that cannot keep its balance. The bone marrow can be hit too. That is where your blood cells are made, in the soft factory inside your bones. Damage there means fewer white blood cells, fewer platelets, fewer red blood cells over time. So infection becomes easier, bleeding becomes easier, oxygen delivery becomes harder. None of this is because the body is weak. It is because the body is an economy. When the supply chain breaks, the shelves go empty. And the most cynical part is how ordinary the failure can look at first. A person can feel sick, then better, then sick again. That middle period is called the latent phase. It is the body running on stored resources, like a city using backup generators. You might think the danger passed, but the damage is still unfolding quietly under the skin. This is why liquidator schedules mattered so much. A few minutes versus an hour could be the difference between manageable insult and system overload. It is also why measuring dose was such a bureaucratic obsession. Not because paperwork is fun, but because time is a drug and a toxin. Now, dose is a slippery word. People mix up radiation itself with contamination. Radiation is energy traveling. Contamination is radioactive material sitting where it should not sit. If you stand near a source, you can be exposed and then walk away. If you inhale dust containing radioactive isotopes, you bring the source inside you. And that is a different kind of problem, because distance is no longer your friend. Think of iodine-131. It is an isotope produced in fission, and it likes the thyroid gland. Your thyroid is a small organ in your neck, greedy for iodine. It uses iodine to make hormones that tune your metabolism. So if the environment has radioactive iodine, your thyroid may absorb it, not because it is stupid, because it is doing its job. Now the source sits in your tissue, emitting radiation close to delicate cells. Cesium-137 is another common fission product. It behaves like potassium, and potassium is everywhere in biology, so cesium can spread through soft tissues, contributing to whole-body dose. Strontium-90 acts like calcium, so it can settle into bone, where bone marrow lives nearby. Each isotope is like a different kind of unwanted tenant, choosing a room in your body. And each has its own half-life, its own pace of decay. Some fade quickly, some linger, quietly billing you over years. But again, this is not magic. It is chemistry plus physics, and your body trying to stay itself anyway. When liquidators wore masks, it was not only for comfort, it was to avoid internal contamination. Because once radioactive dust is inside your lungs, you cannot just step away from it. Your lungs are delicate branching trees of tissue, designed for gas exchange. Particles can lodge there, and clearance is slow. Some are coughed out, some are swallowed, some remain longer than you would like. This is why dust was feared more than the dramatic idea of glowing air. The most dangerous thing is often the thing you can brush off your sleeve. And this brings you to the quiet truth about bodies. Your body has no special sense for danger. It has evolved for heat, cold, hunger, thirst, pain, and predators with teeth. It did not evolve for gamma photons. So you rely on culture, on instruments, on rules, on people telling the truth. And sometimes, in disasters, truth arrives late. Sometimes it arrives wearing a uniform and pretending everything is fine. The biology does not care which version you were told. The chemistry proceeds either way. Now imagine the liquidator again, not as a myth, but as a person. He comes back from a short shift. He steps into a monitoring station. A device checks his clothing and boots. The sensor does not judge his character. It only registers events, like a bored accountant. If the reading is high, the clothing may be taken away. If the reading is low, it may be brushed off and reused. The liquidator washes, he eats, he waits, and inside him there might be no immediate sign of anything. That is the strangest part. The body can be hurt without feeling harmed, so the mind keeps searching for something it can see, and it finds it in the environment, in dust, in porous concrete, in the needles of pine trees, in the seams of rooftops where particles settle like gray pollen. Contamination is not evenly spread. It is patchy, like bad weather. Wind carries particles and drops them where wind slows. Rain pulls material down and concentrates it in puddles, gutters, and low spots. So one patch of ground can be relatively quiet, and a meter away you have a hot spot that makes the counter chatter. This patchiness is why the zone is so deceptive. It looks like a forest. It looks like grass. It looks like a road you could walk barefoot. But the risk is written in invisible specks. Dust is the courier. Dust is a vehicle, not a villain. A particle of fuel, or graphite, or contaminated soil is just matter. It is not angry. It is not even aware that it exists. But if it contains unstable nuclei, it becomes a tiny lighthouse of radiation. And because it is tiny, it travels easily. It rides on boots. It sticks to tires. It clings to fabric. It hides in hair. It falls into cracks. Concrete is not smooth at the microscopic scale. It is a mineral sponge, full of pores and rough edges, so contamination can lodge inside it, protected from casual washing. Metal is smoother, easier to wipe down. Painted surfaces can be decontaminated, sometimes by stripping the paint itself. But soil is soil. Leaves are leaves. A forest floor is a messy quilt of organic debris and mineral grains. You cannot scrub a forest. You can only remove the top layer and then decide where to put it. This is why so much cleanup becomes burial. Remove contaminated soil, put it into trenches, cover it, mark it. Hope the water table stays cooperative. It is not elegant, but it is practical. And in the zone, practicality is the closest thing to mercy. Some decontamination was washing, spraying roads and buildings with water and chemicals to push dust down. It helps, but it also makes contaminated runoff, so now you have dirty water to manage. Other methods were mechanical, scraping, removing roofing material, cutting down trees in the most contaminated areas, stripping topsoil like peeling a scab. Each action reduces exposure in one place and concentrates waste in another. This is the hidden cost of cleanup. You are not deleting contamination. You are relocating it. Like moving clutter into a closet, the closet becomes a problem for later. In some areas, they used a substance called fixative, a kind of polymer or resin sprayed onto surfaces to bind dust. It is like hairspray for radioactive particles. Not glamorous, but effective in the short term. Lock it down. Stop it from becoming airborne. Reduce inhalation risk. Again, not safe, just less bad. And the zone itself becomes a strange museum of materials. Concrete walls that absorbed cesium and strontium. Moss that quietly takes up isotopes from soil. Wood that grows ring by ring, recording what it absorbed. Needles and leaves that catch particles and drop them to the ground. Nature is not cleansing the zone out of kindness. Nature is just cycling matter. Atoms do not retire. They move from soil to plant to insect to bird to fox and back. Bioaccumulation is the term. It means a substance builds up in an organism over time. Not all isotopes bioaccumulate strongly, but some do, depending on chemistry. And ecosystems do what ecosystems do. They eat, they grow, they excrete. They die, they return to the soil. So the zone becomes a slow mixing bowl. Now, you might expect the zone to be a dead place, but emptiness for humans is opportunity for everything else. Without farming, without traffic, without daily disturbance, forests expand, meadows thicken, roads become wildlife corridors, buildings become nests. Wolves and wild boar and deer move through not because they are immune, but because the habitat is quiet. The risk from radiation is real, but so is the risk from humans with guns and engines. Nature chooses the least bad option too. There have been studies of animals in contaminated areas. Some show increased mutation rates in certain species. Some show reduced fertility or other effects. Some show surprisingly normal populations. at least in visible ways. It is complicated because ecology is always complicated. Radiation is one stressor among many. Food availability matters, predation matters, parasites matter, weather matters, and in the absence of human pressure, many populations do well. This is not because radiation is harmless. It is because life is relentless. Life will colonize a parking lot. Life will colonize a volcano slope. Life will colonize your refrigerator if you forget vegetables too long. So the zone becomes a place of quiet beauty and leftover risk. A birch tree growing through a classroom floor. A vine curling around a balcony railing. A bird singing from a streetlight that no longer lights anything. And somewhere in that scene, invisible isotopes keep decaying, each event as indifferent as the last. Now, if you are trying to understand this without panic, it helps to widen your view, because radiation is not unique to disasters. It is not a special curse reserved for broken reactors. It is part of the planet's background hum. You live in a field of natural radioactivity every day. The soil contains uranium and thorium in trace amounts. Rocks contain potassium-40, which is a naturally radioactive form of potassium. Some regions have more. Granite can be a little more radioactive than other building stone. This does not mean your kitchen countertop is plotting against you. It means Earth was assembled from the debris of ancient stars. Those stars made heavy elements, and some of those elements are still slowly changing. Radon is a good example of background radiation with an attitude. Radon is a gas produced as uranium decays in rock and soil. It can seep into basements and enclosed spaces. It is invisible and odorless, which is its whole personality. When inhaled in high concentrations over long periods, it can increase lung cancer risk. Not because radon is evil, because alpha particles emitted in your lungs deliver damage close to sensitive tissue. This is why ventilation matters. Sometimes safety is as simple as moving air. You also get cosmic rays, particles from space, remnants of distant explosions and energetic events. They strike the upper atmosphere and create showers of secondary particles. Some reach the ground. Some pass through your body as you sleep. You do not feel them. Your body does not applaud their journey. They simply pass, and very occasionally they cause a tiny piece of damage that your repair crews handle. If you fly often, you get a higher dose from cosmic radiation because you spend time at higher altitude. The atmosphere is shielding. Less atmosphere above you means more particles reach you. Again, this is not a reason to fear airplanes. It is a reminder that Earth's air is not just for breathing, it is also a protective blanket against space being space. And then there is the funny one people love to mention: bananas. Bananas contain potassium. A small fraction of potassium is potassium-40, so bananas are slightly radioactive. So are Brazil nuts, sometimes more so, because they can concentrate certain elements from soil. And you are radioactive too, just a little. Your body contains potassium and carbon. A small portion of carbon is carbon-14, a naturally radioactive isotope. So you emit a tiny number of decays over time. You are not a hazard, you are just made of matter that obeys physics. This is where the concept of dose becomes useful. Instead of scary, dose is about how much energy is deposited in tissue. It matters how much, how fast, and where. A small dose spread over time is different from a large dose in minutes. External exposure is different from internal contamination. Alpha particles outside your body are often not a big issue because skin stops them. Alpha particles inside your lungs are a different story. Gamma rays can reach deep into you from outside. Depending on energy and shielding, neutrons are rare in most everyday settings, but very serious in reactor conditions. So the word radiation is not one thing. It is a category. Like weather, rain, hail, lightning, and fog are all weather. But you would not pack the same gear for all of them. In the zone, these differences mattered. It mattered what isotopes were present. It mattered whether dust was airborne. It mattered whether people were handling graphite fragments. It mattered whether they were washing streets or digging soil or working close to reactor debris. And yet, the public fear often flattens everything into one image: a glowing green hazard symbol, a dramatic soundtrack, a monster you can outrun if you sprint. Real radiation does not chase. It waits. It sits in place. It rides the wind. It obeys decay curves. It makes you deal with probability. And humans hate probability. Probability feels like unfairness because it is. Two people can receive similar doses and have different outcomes. One repair system catches the errors, another misses. One person gets a cancer later, another does not. And the mind demands a moral explanation that physics refuses to provide. This is why accidents become stories about heroes and villains. Because stories are easier than systems. But if you stay with the systems, you see the real tragedy more clearly. Not just the physics, but the human machinery that turned a bad situation into a catastrophe. A reactor does not fail alone. It needs people, procedures, and pressures. It needs assumptions that feel reasonable until they are fatal. It needs communication gaps, the kind that appear in every organization. It needs someone to say, "It will be fine," and someone else to believe it, because believing is easier than stopping. The night of the Chernobyl accident involved technical choices, yes, but it also involved culture, hierarchy, fear of admitting problems, and in a hierarchy, the safest sentence is often the one that says nothing. A control room can be full of instruments and still be blind, because blindness is not always missing data. Sometimes it is having data and not being allowed to believe it. You can picture it like a ship's bridge at night. The radar shows a storm ahead. The captain wants the schedule to stay pretty, so the storm becomes a misunderstanding until it becomes the ocean. In complex technology, disasters rarely have a single cause. They have a personality made of small decisions, a test that should have been postponed, a rule that was treated like a suggestion, a warning that was waved away because it was inconvenient. The uncomfortable truth is that physics is not the only danger. The system you build around physics matters just as much. People like to imagine that catastrophic accidents are exotic, like they require a villain with a waxed mustache. But more often, they require paperwork, deadlines, and fatigue. You can feel this in the way instructions change in real time. One supervisor says the dose is manageable. Another whispers that the meter is broken. A third says, "Do it anyway," because there is no other plan. And suddenly, you are not dealing with radiation. You are dealing with uncertainty delivered at human scale. A reactor is complicated, But panic is always simple. So the response tries to become a machine, assign tasks, set limits, rotate people, wash surfaces, move debris, measure, record, repeat. It is comforting, in a grim way, that procedures exist, because procedures mean someone tried to imagine the worst. But procedures are only ink until a person follows them, and the person is tired and cold and hungry. The person wants the shift to end. The person wants to believe the mask is enough. This is the part where you stop thinking in headlines. You start thinking in corridors and boots and dust. You start noticing how human beings handle invisible threats. They turn them into routines. They turn them into shifts and stamps and numbers. They turn them into normal, because normal is survivable, even in a place that should not be normal at all. A liquidator does not spend all day contemplating mortality. He spends all day trying to do a task quickly. He counts minutes like coins. He watches other people for cues. He learns which jokes are safe to tell. He learns which questions make a supervisor angry. In that way, the disaster becomes a workplace. And workplaces have their own radiation, not the nuclear kind, the social kind. The pressure to comply, to not be the difficult one. The pressure to keep the machine moving. The pressure to believe the problem is contained because the alternative is too large. And that is how small decisions become large consequences, not through drama, but through momentum. A machine of people doing what machines do, repeating actions until reality forces a stop. When you look at the accident through this lens, it becomes less mysterious. It becomes a case study in how humans negotiate with risk. We do not calculate danger cleanly. We estimate it emotionally and socially. Then we act. If the group acts calm, you feel calmer. If the boss acts certain, you borrow that certainty. If the paperwork says acceptable, you try to become acceptable too. In the zone, this negotiation happened under pressure because there was urgency and national pride and a desire to make the problem look smaller. Radiation does not respond to pride, but pride responds to deadlines. So you get plans that are bold and sometimes reckless. You get men sent to roofs with shovels. You get trucks hauling contaminated soil because the soil cannot argue. You get water sprayed on roads because it looks like cleaning. And you get a kind of grim optimism, the belief that if everyone works hard enough, reality will cooperate. Sometimes it does, a little. Sometimes you prevent an even worse release. Sometimes you reduce exposure in key areas. Sometimes you buy time, which is what emergencies are always buying. But time is also what you spend, and the currency is bodies. So when people talk about heroism here, keep it plain. The heroism is not cinematic. It is logistical. It is showing up, doing a dangerous job, then doing it again tomorrow. It is not knowing everything and still participating anyway. It is being part of a cleanup that cannot truly finish. Because the next actor in the story is not a person. It is time itself, slow and unsentimental. After the alarms and the orders, the quiet returns. And in that quiet, the remaining danger changes form. It stops being a crisis. It becomes weather. Radiation is not only something that happens in an instant, it is also something that fades, one decay at a time. This fading has a name that sounds almost gentle: half-life. Half-life is a way of describing patience. It tells you how long it takes for half of a radioactive substance to decay. Not all of it, just half. Then half of what remains. Then half again, like a candle that never quite goes out. You can think of it as a crowd leaving a stadium. Not everyone stands up at once. People trickle out. Then more trickle out. The crowd thins, but the stadium is never instantly empty. This is the first thing half-life does to your expectations. You want an off switch? You want a clean ending. But decay is a curve, not a door. Some isotopes fade quickly, like sparks. Iodine-131 has a half-life of about 8 days. That means in a little over a week, half of it is gone. In a few weeks, most of it is gone. Not by being cleaned, but by turning into something else. That sounds reassuring until you remember what iodine does. It concentrates in the thyroid. So the danger is not only how long it lasts, it is what it does while it lasts. Other isotopes are more stubborn. Cesium-137 has a half-life of about 30 years. 30 years is long enough for cities to change names, long enough for children to become adults, long enough for buildings to rot quietly into the ground. Strontium-90 is similar, with a half-life around 29 years. It lingers in the bones of the landscape. Plutonium isotopes can last far longer. Plutonium-239 has a half-life of about 24,000 years. That is not a cleanup timeline. That is geology. That is cave paintings becoming dust. That is languages dying and new ones forgetting the old warnings. When you hear a half-life like that, your mind tries to reject it because you are built for seasons, not millennia. You can plan for winter. You cannot emotionally plan for 24,000 years, yet the atoms will proceed, whether you plan or not. This is why the zone feels so strange at night. It is a human place, trapped in a non-human schedule. The buildings were made to last decades, maybe a century. The contamination was made by physics to last as long as it likes. So the landscape becomes a negotiation between decay and decay. Concrete decays, wood decays, metal rusts, paint flakes off in thin curls, and radioactive atoms decay too, at their own pace. Two kinds of fading layered over each other. One you can see, one you cannot. Half-life also teaches you something about false comfort. A substance with a short half-life is intensely radioactive because many atoms are decaying quickly. A substance with a long half-life decays slowly. It is less intense, but it lingers. So the danger is not just duration, it is the combination of intensity, chemistry, and location. A fast-burning isotope can be a sprint. A slow-burning isotope can be a marathon you never asked to run. In the zone, time did what time always does. It spread things out. Wind moved dust from one place to another. Rain drove particles into soil. Plants pulled elements up, then dropped them again. Animals carried contamination in fur and hooves. Fires, when they happen, can lift particles back into the air. Because a forest is not a sealed container, it is a breathing system. And half-life does not mean a straight line toward safety. It means a general trend interrupted by weather and ecology. You can have an area that becomes less intense over decades, and then a storm rearranges dust. or a construction project disturbs soil, or a wildfire makes old contamination airborne again. Congratulations, the past is now particulate. This is why waiting is described like weather here, because it is not passive. It is an active, slow process that reshapes risk. Waiting changes what is dangerous and how. The most contaminated particles settle deeper. The surface becomes cleaner, then dirt is turned, and the story resurfaces. A roof collapses, and trapped dust becomes free. A tree falls, and roots pull soil up. Time is a worker that never clocks out, and it does not fill out reports. If you visit the zone in your mind now, decades after the accident, it feels almost peaceful. Not safe, not entirely, but quieter. The loudest isotopes are gone. The short half-life hazards have mostly decayed away. What remains is a slower, broader hum. Hotspots still exist, like old arguments, but the overall field is different from those first brutal weeks. People who manage the zone today rely on maps of contamination. They rely on surveys and sampling. They measure soil, plants, and animal tissue. They model how isotopes move through the environment. And they make rules, because rules are how you live with invisibility. Do not eat the mushrooms from certain forests. Do not drink the milk from certain farms. Do not hunt in certain areas, or at least test the meat. These rules sound specific because they are. Contamination is not evenly spread, and neither is exposure. In many parts of the wider region, life continued. People farmed. People raised children. People adapted, sometimes with good information, sometimes without. This is another uncomfortable truth. Disasters do not end for everyone at the same time. For some, the crisis is a day. For others, it is a lifetime of checkups and uncertainty and quiet resentment. And for the land, it is simply a long chemical story. The zone becomes a lesson in scale, human scale, where years feel long, and atomic scale, where years can be a blink or an eternity. When you sit with that, another thought arrives. Radiation is only one invisible force you negotiate with every day. Your entire life is spent inside narrow margins, a thin band of temperature, a thin band of pressure, a narrow mix of gases. And you rarely notice any of it because normal is quiet. But the universe is always waiting outside normal like a draft under a door. Speaking of quiet forces that do not hate you but will still ruin you, consider heat, not the cozy heat of a blanket, the indifferent heat transfer that leaks your body into the room. Your body runs warm because metabolism is controlled burning. You eat chemical energy, you convert it, and a lot of it becomes waste heat. You are a small furnace with opinions. To stay functional, you have to keep your core temperature in a tight range. A few degrees too high, and proteins begin to misfold. A few degrees too low, and enzymes slow down, like workers refusing overtime. Heat illness sounds dramatic, but it starts quietly. Sweat, fatigue, confusion. Your body trying to dump heat through evaporation. Sweating is clever, but it is expensive. It costs water and salts. And if the air is humid, sweat does not evaporate well, so you can sweat and still overheat, which feels like betrayal. In high heat, your blood vessels widen near the skin. That helps radiate heat away, but it also lowers blood pressure. Your heart works harder. pushing blood through a system that is trying to cool and function at once. If you cannot cool down, you drift toward heat stroke. That is when the thermostat fails. The brain suffers. The body stops sweating sometimes, not because you are better, but because you are worse. This is the part people miss. Nature does not always give you pain in the right order. Sometimes the warning signs fade right before the collapse. Congratulations, you misread a silence. Cold is similar, but quieter. Cold does not attack you. It simply steals heat from you, because that is what temperature differences do. At first, you shiver, tiny muscle contractions generating heat. It feels almost manageable, like your body is doing push-ups, but shivering burns energy. You run out of fuel if you cannot eat. Your hands lose dexterity because nerves and muscles dislike cold. Simple tasks become complicated. Buttons become puzzles. Knots become philosophy. And then, as core temperature drops, your thinking slows. Hypothermia is notorious for making people do strange things. Some remove clothing, a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing. It is not madness in a poetic sense. It is nerves misfiring, perception breaking down, and the brain losing its grip. In the end, cold can feel oddly warm because sensation becomes unreliable. Again, no villain, just physics and a body with limits. Pressure is another invisible agreement you live inside. Right now, air presses on you from all directions. It presses on your skin, your lungs, your eyes. You do not feel it because you are equalized. The pressure inside you matches the pressure outside. But change that pressure, and the calm breaks quickly. Go high enough in the mountains, and the air thins. Not in a mystical way, but in a molecular way. Fewer oxygen molecules per breath. Your lungs can inhale, but they cannot conjure oxygen out of empty space. So your body responds. Breathing rate increases. Heart rate increases. You produce more red blood cells over time. You adjust if you are given time, but if you climb too fast, you get altitude sickness, headache, nausea, fatigue. In severe cases, fluid can build in the lungs or brain. High-altitude pulmonary edema, high-altitude cerebral edema. Those names are long, but the idea is simple. Low oxygen stresses the body, and the body sometimes responds badly. The danger at altitude can feel unfair because the view is so beautiful. Snow peaks, clean sky, bright silence, and inside your skull, pressure starts to rise. Nature loves contrast like that. Deep water is the opposite problem. More pressure, not less. As you descend, water presses harder on everything. Your ears feel it first because they are sensitive cavities. You equalize if you know how, but keep going deeper, and pressure changes the rules of gases. Nitrogen dissolves into your tissues under pressure. It is not toxic on land, but at depth, it can act like an anesthetic. Nitrogen narcosis is sometimes called the martini effect because at certain depths, you become pleasantly stupid, which is a charming condition until you need to solve a problem underwater. Then there is decompression sickness, the bends. If you come up too fast, dissolved gases form bubbles. Bubbles in blood and tissue are not a vibe. They can cause pain dizziness, paralysis, even death. So divers ascend slowly with safety stops, time again acting as shielding. Time is always the quiet safety gear. And then there is the vacuum of space, the classic indifferent environment. People imagine space as a silent ocean. It is quieter than that. It is a near absence of anything. In vacuum, water boils at low temperatures because pressure is missing. Your saliva, the moisture in your eyes, the water on your tongue. Congratulations! Your body fluids are now enthusiastic about escaping. You would not explode like in movies. Your skin has structural integrity. But without pressure, your lungs cannot function normally. You would lose consciousness in seconds. Not from drama, but from lack of oxygen delivery to the brain. And if you stayed exposed longer, you would die. Because life is a negotiation with pressure, and the vacuum does not negotiate. All of these forces are around you all the time. They are not threats when you are inside the right margins. They become threats when you drift outside. And that is what makes them similar to radiation. Most of the time, you do not feel the margins. You just live inside them, assuming they will hold, until you are asked to work on a roof for 90 seconds, until you are asked to breathe air that contains a little too much dust, until you are asked to trust a system that is pretending. The zone is a dramatic example, but the lesson is ordinary. Your safety is usually built out of boring things. Honest measurements, clear communication, time limits, ventilation fans, maintenance schedules, regulations that people respect even when nobody is watching. Because, in the end, physics is always watching. Not with malice, but with consistency. Now, let your mind drift back to the exclusion zone again. Not to the explosion, not to the fire, to the slower years after, when people left and the land stayed. The half-life clock kept ticking, indifferent and steady. The buildings began to soften, wood swelling with moisture, roofs sagging under snow loads, roads cracked wider, frost wedging itself into every small weakness. Trees pushed through pavement, because pavement is only a temporary argument. In some places, the most dangerous contamination was sealed under concrete and steel. The famous sarcophagus, and later, the new safe confinement structure, a giant arch, built like a slow apology. It does not erase what happened. It buys time, again. Time for decay, time for planning, time for not inhaling dust. But time is not free. Time requires maintenance, inspections, budgets, and competence. Even the act of containing contamination becomes a long-term social project. A promise that future people will keep paying attention, which is a risky promise because humans have short attention spans. We forget, and we get bored, and we move on. Atoms do not get bored. So the zone becomes a kind of mirror. It shows you what happens when human time and atomic time overlap. It shows you how quickly a city can become forest. It shows you how slowly certain hazards fade. It shows you that nature does not heal in a moral sense. Nature just continues. A moose walks past a schoolyard. It steps over a swing set, and the chains do not squeak because there is no child to kick them into motion. The animal is not making a statement. It is just following calories, and the quiet is full of them. In places where people used to mow lawns, grass grows tall enough to hide a fox. In places where buses used to idle, moss spreads like a slow green spill. And you stand there, in your imagination, noticing how the world keeps its own schedule. The strange comfort is that atoms and ecosystems are both honest. They do not pretend to care, and they do not pretend to stop. But the human mind still wants a clean answer. It wants to know, is it safe now? Yes or no? And the zone answers with an irritating shrug. Sometimes, safe is a map, not a feeling. Sometimes, safe is a boot path that someone tested yesterday. Sometimes, safe is a rule that says, do not touch the pretty moss. Because the real risk is often not the air around you. The real risk is what sticks to you. A smear on a glove, a flake under a fingernail, a dusting on a pant leg that later ends up in a car seat. Contamination loves the boring places. Cracks in concrete, where water pools and dries. The edges of doorways, where people used to brush past. Roof gutters, where rain collects everything and sets it down again. If you want a gentle image, think of the zone like a house after a party. The music is gone. The guests are gone. But the sticky spots remain, and you only find them when you step there. Now multiply that by forests and decades and weather. The problem becomes less about a single disaster moment. It becomes about surfaces, which is not poetic, but it is true. A smooth steel railing can be wiped, tested, wiped again. A porous brick wall is a sponge made of minerals. Dust gets into it and it stays, like gossip in a small town. So some cleanup was literally destructive. Remove the top layer of material because the top layer remembers too much. Sometimes they shaved roads. Sometimes they stripped paint and plaster. Sometimes they scraped soil and moved it elsewhere. You can almost hear the logic clanking along. If the danger is in the matter, move the matter. If the danger is in the surface, remove the surface. If the danger is everywhere, limit the time people spend there. And as those practical choices piled up, the zone became a landscape of stored problems. Burial sites, trenches, waste mounds capped with clean soil, places with fences and signs that do not explain much, because explanation does not stop isotopes. And when you think about long half-lives, you start to notice an uncomfortable detail. The warning signs are made of metal and paint. Those materials have their own half-lives too. Paint peels, metal rusts, letters fade, so the message meant for future humans has to be rewritten again and again. It is one of the strangest chores on Earth. Maintenance of a warning. A recurring reminder that something invisible is still doing arithmetic. Now, if you let your mind tilt away from the zone for a moment, you can see the bigger pattern. Radiation is a special case of a general truth. Your life is possible because Earth is a very specific compromise. Not too hot, not too cold, not too thin, not too thick, not too dry, not too wet. And you do not usually notice this compromise because you were born into it. You think normal is the default, but normal is actually a thin, temporary treaty with physics. Speaking of treaties that break quietly, you can start with pressure, because pressure is the one that holds you together without your permission. Right now, the air is pushing on you, gently, constantly, from every side. It pushes on your skin, but your skin pushes back. It pushes on your lungs, but your lungs are built for it. The reason you feel fine is because the pressure inside you matches the pressure outside you. That is the trick. Balance. And when balance changes, your body becomes very interested very quickly. Imagine you are standing on a mountain road at night. The air is cold and clean, and the stars look sharp, like they were freshly cut. You think the danger is the cliff edge, but the cliff edge is honest. At least you can see it. The real issue is that every breath has fewer oxygen molecules riding inside it. Not because oxygen vanished, but because the air is less crowded up here. Your lungs can still expand, your ribs still lift, your chest still does its job, but the delivery truck arrives half empty. So you breathe faster without meaning to. Your heart taps its foot, impatient, trying to compensate. And if you stay long enough, your kidneys join the conversation. They adjust the chemistry of your blood. They help you breathe more effectively by shifting how carbon dioxide is managed. Your bone marrow eventually gets involved too. It makes more red blood cells because red blood cells are your oxygen taxis. This is acclimatization, a slow negotiation between your body and thin air. But if you rush the climb, you do not give your body time to sign the paperwork. So you get altitude sickness, a headache that feels like your skull has an opinion, nausea, fatigue, a strange irritability because the brain does not like being underfed. And in severe cases, the body does something dramatic. In its quiet way, fluid leaks into the lungs or into the brain. High-altitude pulmonary edema and high-altitude cerebral edema. Those are long names for a simple disaster. Your tissues are drowning while you stand in clear moonlight. Congratulations! The view was not the hardest part. Now, pressure can also go the other way. Down, not up. Imagine you are underwater, deep enough that the surface is only a memory of brightness. At first, it feels like a peaceful place. Muted sound, slow motion, your own bubbles ticking upward. But the water is heavy and it stacks on you like a quiet debt. Every 10 meters, roughly, you add another atmosphere of pressure. More weight, more squeeze, more insistence from physics. Your ears complain first because they are delicate air pockets. You pinch your nose, you blow gently, you equalize. You have learned to negotiate with your own anatomy. But deeper changes begin to happen, and they are not about pain. They are about gases behaving differently under pressure. Nitrogen, which you usually ignore, starts to dissolve into you more. It dissolves into your blood and into your tissues because pressure makes gases more soluble. And nitrogen has a strange effect at depth. It makes you a little drunk. Nitrogen narcosis is sometimes called the martini effect because the feeling can be silly and warm. You might laugh at nothing. You might feel invincible. And that is the problem, because you are not. The ocean does not care that you are having a fun moment. If something goes wrong down there, you need a clear mind and steady hands. Instead, you have a brain that thinks this is all charming. Then there is the exit problem. If you come back up too quickly, the dissolved gases in your body come out of solution. They form bubbles, like opening a soda bottle after shaking it. In your joints, bubbles cause pain, the bends. In your blood, bubbles can block circulation. In your nervous system, they can do worse. So divers ascend slowly, with pauses, letting the gases leave gently through the lungs. Time again, acting as safety gear, a slow schedule that keeps you from becoming foam. And if you want a more cynical thought, consider how similar this is to radiation. Dose rate matters. How fast the stress arrives matters. A little insult spread over time is manageable. A big insult delivered quickly overwhelms the system. The universe loves this theme. It reuses it everywhere. Now tilt your attention from pressure to heat, not the comforting heat of a mug in your hands. The brute heat physics uses to rearrange proteins and shut down brains. Your body generates heat constantly because metabolism is controlled combustion. You burn fuel, you capture some energy, and the rest becomes warmth. It is why you are a little warmer than the room. It is also why you can die in both directions. Too much heat, and your enzymes lose their shape. Too little heat, and your chemistry slows until it cannot keep up. Heat feels dramatic in movies, with deserts and mirages, but heat illness often starts like an annoying inconvenience. You sweat, your shirt sticks to you. Salt dries on your skin like fine dust. Your body opens blood vessels near the surface, trying to shed heat like a radiator. That helps cooling, but it can drop your blood pressure, so your heart has to work harder, pushing blood through widened vessels. You feel tired, but it is not just mood. It is your circulatory system doing overtime. If you keep going, you drift toward heat exhaustion, dizziness, headache, weakness. Your body is still sweating, still trying, still begging for evaporation to do its magic. But humidity can ruin that plan. If the air is already full of water vapor, sweat does not evaporate well, so you can be drenched and still overheating. It feels like betrayal, but it is just physics. Then comes the more serious failure, heat stroke. That is when your temperature control breaks down. Your brain begins to malfunction. Confusion, slurred speech, strange behavior. Sometimes sweating stops, not because you're recovered, but because your system is collapsing. Congratulations, the warning light burned out. Cold is the same story, told in a quieter voice. Cold does not attack, it just takes. It steals heat from you because that is what gradients do. At first, your body fights back with shivering, tiny muscle contractions, burning fuel to create warmth. It can almost feel productive, like your body is doing chores for you. But shivering is expensive. It drains glycogen, it drains fat stores, it drains your patience. Meanwhile, your hands become stupid. Fine motor control fades because cold slows nerves and stiffens muscles. Buttons become riddles. A zipper becomes a moral test. And as your core temperature drops, your thinking becomes soft at the edges. Hypothermia makes poor decisions feel reasonable. Some people take off clothing near the end. Paradoxical undressing. It is not because they suddenly feel bold. It is because the nervous system misfires and perception breaks. Cold can feel warm right before it finishes the job. Nature is not obligated to give you accurate sensations. It is only obligated to obey thermodynamics. Now you can widen the idea again. Heat and cold and pressure are invisible forces until they are not. Most of your life, you live inside a narrow corridor where your body can keep its promises. And the corridor is surprisingly small. A few degrees. A certain oxygen pressure, a certain hydration level and salt balance, and blood pH. The body is resilient, but it is not limitless. It is a set of chemical reactions that work best in a small range, like a machine with very specific tolerances. You do not feel those tolerances when things are normal. That is why normal feels like freedom. But normal is actually stability, a stable pocket carved out of a chaotic universe. And speaking of stable pockets, you can think about the one you are not in: space. People talk about space like it is a beautiful emptiness. It is emptiness, yes, but it is not polite about it. If you step outside without a suit, the first issue is not freezing. That is the fairy tale. The first issue is that you are no longer being pressed on by air. Pressure vanishes, and your body reacts in a way that is both boring and terrifying. Water boils at lower temperatures when pressure is low. So moisture in your mouth and eyes starts to bubble, not because you are cooking, but because the environment is missing a rule you rely on. If you hold your breath, your lungs can rupture because expanding gases need space. So the correct move is exhaling, which feels ridiculous because you are in vacuum. You would lose consciousness quickly because oxygen stops moving into your blood effectively. Your brain, always needy, runs out of usable oxygen in seconds. The good news is that you would not have time for long-suffering thoughts. The bad news is that this is because your brain is already offline, and if you remained exposed, you would die, not from hate, but from missing conditions. Life is a negotiation, and space refuses to sign. Now come back down to Earth, where the dangers are less dramatic, but more common. Because the truly irritating forces are the ones that can kill you in a quiet room. Carbon monoxide is one of them. A gas with no smell, no color, and no interest in your survival. It binds to hemoglobin, your oxygen-carrying protein, with a stronger grip than oxygen, so your red blood cells get tricked into carrying the wrong passenger. You can be in a warm house with a faulty heater and slowly suffocate with blood full of useless cargo. You feel sleepy. You feel confused. You lie down because your brain wants rest and it never gets up again. Congratulations. The danger was comfortable, and this is part of the same story as radiation. Invisible, measurable, indifferent. Something that does not announce itself with claws. So humans build instruments, detectors, alarms, monitors, rules. We build cultural senses for dangers our bodies cannot feel. A carbon monoxide detector is like a Geiger counter for bad air. It gives the invisible a voice. It clicks, or beeps, or flashes. Not because it cares, because you taught it to be your borrowed nerve ending. In a way, that is the most human thing you do. You extend your senses with machines because your biology is ancient. Your nervous system was designed for predators and falls and hunger, not for isotopes or thin air or chemical asphyxiants or pressure physics. So you outsource perception. And then you have to do the harder part. You have to act on what you perceive. This is where systems matter, because a warning is only useful if it leads to a change. A Geiger counter can click, a dosimeter can record, a monitor can beep in a control room. But the response depends on people, and people are complicated. In the aftermath of disasters, you see this again and again. The science is harsh. but it is consistent. The human side is softer and therefore more unpredictable. Now, drift back to Chernobyl for a moment, not to relive the drama, but to notice the long habits. The zone still requires constant management, not because radiation is actively plotting, but because contamination does not put itself away. Visitors walk on certain routes. Workers maintain barriers. Researchers take samples. They check soil for cesium and strontium. They watch how radionuclides move in plants. They measure radon in buildings, because radon collects in enclosed spaces. They check the new safe confinement, a structure built to keep dust from becoming airborne. They monitor for corrosion and water leaks, because a sealed problem can become unsealed if you ignore it long enough. Maintenance is the unglamorous spine of safety, and that is a wider lesson than nuclear accidents. A dam requires maintenance. A hospital requires maintenance. A body requires maintenance, and it is not great at it. We like building more than we like caring for what we built. We like shiny openings and ribbon cuttings. We do not like budgets for inspection. We do not like training drills. We do not like boring warnings that say, replace the pipe before it fails. So sometimes the universe gets to remind us, in its calm voice. It says, you forgot to tighten the bolt. Now you are going to learn about pressure. Or it says, you ignored the alarm. Now you are going to learn about fire. Or it says, you lied about contamination. Now you are going to learn about dose. These are not moral lessons. They are consequences of systems interacting with physics. But you can still feel something like philosophy in them, because they reveal what you actually are. A creature living inside margins, pretending they are wide. A mind that wants certainty, living in a world of probability. A body that feels solid, made of molecules that are mostly empty space. Even your bones are lattices, full of gaps. You are not a statue. You are a process. And processes can go wrong, which sounds bleak until you realize processes can also go right for a long time. Long enough to build warm rooms. Long enough to invent detectors. Long enough to learn the difference between fear and measurement. Now consider another quiet truth about the zone. It is not one place. It is layers. The surface layer, where dust settles and plants grow. The building layer, where porous materials hold memories. The buried layer, where waste was moved and capped. The atmospheric layer, where tiny particles sometimes lift during wind or fire. And the biological layer, where living things move matter around without permission. When a boar digs for roots, it disturbs soil. When mushrooms grow, they can concentrate certain elements. When a fire burns through a contaminated forest, ash can carry radionuclides. Not evenly, not always, but enough to matter. This is why some of the most anxious days in later years involved smoke. Because smoke is a way for the past to become air again. Fire is chemistry and heat, but it is also transportation. It takes what was on the ground and makes it airborne. It does not create new radionuclides, but it can redistribute what is already there. And redistribution is its own kind of hazard. So you get a strange, modern job. Firefighters in forests where the fuel sometimes includes contaminated litter. They wear protective gear. They use respirators. They monitor dose. They fight ordinary fire, but the smoke has an extra ingredient. Again, not cinematic, just an additional line in the risk assessment. Now, let the story widen again, because Chernobyl is not the only place where humans learned this lesson. There was Fukushima after the earthquake and tsunami. Different reactor design, different event chain, same general theme. Complex systems fail through combinations of rare events and ordinary choices. Then, there are places like Ramsar in Iran, where background radiation is naturally high due to geology. Or Kerala in India, where monazite sands contain thorium. In those places, people have lived for generations with a higher natural dose, and most of them do not glow conveniently for tourists. They build houses, cook meals, argue with relatives, and age in the usual ways. You might see a headline and assume it proves radiation is harmless or that humans are secretly indestructible. But the honest lesson is duller and more useful. Dose is context, and biology is a long game. If a community grows up with a steady background, the dose rate is low and spread out. If the exposure is mostly external, distance and walls still help. If the radionuclides are locked in rock, they are less likely to end up in lungs. That is the quiet difference between living on spicy geology and breathing a cloud of fresh fish and dust. You do not need to fear the ground under you tonight. You just need to remember that nature has always been slightly radioactive and that disasters are about concentration. A normal background is a faint hiss. A reactor accident is someone turning the volume knob too far, too fast, in the wrong room. And once you accept that, you can stop treating radiation like a supernatural exception. You can treat it like one member of a larger family. Invisible forces that become deadly when the margins slip. Because there is something almost comical about how thin your comfort zone is. You are not built for extremes. You are built for a narrow band that Earth happens to provide most days. The planet gives you a breathable mix of gases, a tolerable pressure, and temperatures that do not instantly ruin proteins. And you repay it by acting like this is the default setting of reality. It is not. It is a temporary local agreement. So now, you drift away from isotopes and disaster maps, and you drift toward the other invisible enforcers: heat, pressure, and the chemical trickery of the air itself. They are always present, always moving energy around. They are not dramatic until you meet their edges. Imagine you are standing in a desert at night. The sand is pale under moonlight, and it looks calm enough to sleep on. But the calm is a lie told by your eyes. During the day, the ground stored heat like a battery. Now it is bleeding that heat back into the sky, slowly and efficiently. And your body, if you are there without shelter, is a warm object in a coldening world. You are constantly losing heat, even when you feel fine. Your skin radiates infrared like a quiet beacon. Air steals heat by convection, a fancy word for being robbed by moving molecules. If there is wind, the theft speeds up. If your clothing is damp, evaporation pulls heat away even faster. Cold is not an attacker. It is a gradient doing paperwork. Your body tries to stay around a steady internal temperature, not because it is proud, but because enzymes work best in that range. A few degrees colder and reactions slow down. A few degrees warmer and proteins start folding wrong, like origami done by tired hands. So you have automatic systems, the ones you never asked for. Blood vessels near the skin tighten in cold to keep heat deeper. Muscles shiver, burning fuel to make warmth. Your brain complains because it is the most expensive organ you own. The uncomfortable detail is that these defenses cost energy. Shivering is not free. It burns through glycogen stores, then starts leaning on fat. If you cannot eat, you eventually cannot pay the heat bill. And your fine motor control goes first, because hands are optional in an emergency. Fingers turn clumsy, like they have forgotten their job description. A zipper becomes a puzzle. A phone becomes a useless slab. Then your mind softens around the edges. Hypothermia makes you sleepy because the brain misreads the situation. It is an ugly joke because sleepiness feels like relief. In severe cold, people can become confused and unbothered. They may even undress, paradoxical undressing, because nerves send nonsense signals. Congratulations, your perception has resigned. Now flip the gradient. Imagine heat that does not let you cool. A humid night, still air, heavy with moisture, like breathing through a warm towel. Sweat is supposed to save you. Evaporation is your built-in air conditioner, but evaporation needs dry air to work well. When the air is already saturated, sweat stays on the skin and cooling stalls, so your body keeps sweating anyway. Because it is trying, you lose water, you lose salts, sodium and potassium, the ions that make nerves fire correctly. Your blood volume shrinks quietly, like a reservoir dropping. And to compensate, your heart beats faster. You feel tired, then dizzy, then nauseated. Heat exhaustion sounds mild, but it is your circulatory system being asked to do too much at once. Cool the body, maintain blood pressure, feed the brain, support the muscles, all while water is leaving you. If the cooling fails completely, you drift toward heat stroke. That is the moment when temperature control breaks down and the brain starts to malfunction. Confusion, poor coordination, strange behavior. Sometimes sweating stops, which sounds like good news to people who do not know better. But it is often a sign the system is failing. Congratulations, the alarm has gone quiet. This is why heat can kill in ways that look boring. No monster, no violence. Just a warm day that turns into a shutdown. Now, speaking of shutdowns, you can consider pressure again. Pressure is the invisible hand holding your fluids where they belong. It is also the hand that keeps gases dissolved and keeps your lungs working predictably. At sea level, you are wrapped in air like a soft compress. Your blood carries gases in solution because the pressure supports it. Your lungs inflate and deflate against a predictable outside force. But climb high enough and the rules change. Not because oxygen disappears, but because each breath contains fewer molecules, less crowding, less delivery. Your body notices immediately. Breathing speeds up, heart rate rises. You feel a little restless, like you drank too much coffee, except that coffee is missing. If you stay, you acclimatize. The kidneys adjust blood chemistry, letting you breathe more without losing control of pH. Over days to weeks, your body makes more red blood cells, more hemoglobin, more taxis for oxygen. But if you climb too fast, you can get altitude sickness, a headache that arrives like a pressure band, nausea, fatigue, sleep that feels shallow because your breathing keeps waking you. In severe cases, fluid leaks where it should not, into the lungs, making breathing wet and desperate, into the brain, raising pressure inside the skull. Those conditions have formal names, but the story is simple. Low oxygen plus stress can make your blood vessels behave badly. And the mountains stay beautiful the whole time. They do not change their expression, even when you do. Now trade thin air for heavy water. Go down into the ocean, where pressure stacks up with every meter. At first, it is just your ears complaining. Then, it becomes chemistry. Gases dissolve more under pressure, and nitrogen becomes more present in your tissues. Nitrogen narcosis makes some divers feel calm, amused, or invincible. It is sometimes compared to alcohol because it lowers judgment, which is adorable because the ocean is not a safe place for lowered judgment. Then you have to come back up, and the exit has rules. Ascend too fast and dissolved gases form bubbles. Bubbles in blood and joints cause decompression sickness, the bends, pain, dizziness, neurological trouble, sometimes worse. So divers ascend slowly, pausing at safety stops. Time becomes a tool again, like it was for liquidators. Not because time is kind, but because time is a buffer against sudden change. A body can adapt to slow gradients. It fails under sudden ones. That theme is everywhere if you let yourself notice, and it brings you to the most insulting, invisible force of all, the air you breathe, which can betray you without changing taste or smell. You already met carbon monoxide, the quiet thief. But air can fail you in other ways too. Oxygen can drop in enclosed spaces, not dramatically, just enough to make you sluggish. A fermentation vat, a ship hold, a poorly ventilated room with dry ice. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air and can pool low like an invisible fog. You step into it and your body reacts with confusion because it is not built for this. Carbon dioxide does not just replace oxygen. It also triggers the urge to breathe, and at high levels, it can make you panic or pass out. Your brain monitors carbon dioxide closely because it affects blood acidity, so a rise in carbon dioxide feels urgent, even before oxygen is fully gone. Congratulations, your panic button is chemical. Then there is hydrogen sulfide, a gas that smells like rotten eggs at low levels. At higher concentrations, it can paralyze your sense of smell, so the warning vanishes right when the danger becomes serious. That is a recurring joke in physiology. The body gives you a signal, then removes it at the worst time. And all of this is why modern life is full of little guardians, monitors, alarms, ventilation fans, air exchange standards, boring building codes written by people who have seen what happens otherwise. The universe does not care about your comfort, but engineers sometimes do, out of self-interest. Now, if you want to keep this tethered to the story you started with, return to the liquidators, not to the roof, not to the reactor, but to the simplest part of their day. the part that sounds almost comforting. Coming back indoors, peeling off protective layers, standing still while someone checks a meter. It is a small ritual of separation. Outside is the contaminated world. Inside is the managed world. A door, a line, a station, a rule. And the truth is, that ritual is not unique to nuclear disasters. Every time you wash your hands before eating, you are doing a softer version. You are separating worlds. Outside, microbes. Inside, tissues that would rather not host them. Every time you wear a seatbelt, you are acknowledging momentum. Every time you put on sunscreen, you are acknowledging ultraviolet damage. Every time you check a smoke detector, you are negotiating with chemistry. Most of your safety is rituals against invisible things. And if you are honest, you do not perform them because you feel danger. You perform them because you were taught. Culture is your borrowed nervous system. It tells you what your skin cannot feel. It tells you which invisible risks are worth caring about and which ones are background noise. That is why the failure of communication at Chernobyl mattered so much. Not just because data was missing. Because the borrowed nervous system was compromised. People did not know which rituals were required or when. Some were told things were fine when they were not. Some were given incomplete rules. Some were simply pushed by urgency. And urgency is a drug. It makes long-term risk feel like tomorrow's problem. But biology always cashes tomorrow's checks, eventually. Now, drift wider again, away from any single disaster. Consider how the body handles insult in general. Because radiation damage, heat damage, pressure damage, low oxygen damage, they all share a boring truth. Cells respond to stress with triage. They slow non-essential tasks. They prioritize survival. They produce stress proteins. They change metabolism. They signal inflammation. Inflammation is not a villain either. It is a controlled fire meant to clear debris and recruit help. But like any controlled fire, it can spread. In severe heat, proteins misfold and cells panic. In low oxygen, cells switch to less efficient energy pathways. In radiation exposure, the damage to DNA triggers checkpoints, repair, or cell death. In infection, immune cells release signals that raise temperature and change blood flow. Different triggers, similar toolbox. Your body has only so many ways to say something is wrong, which is why symptoms can be non-specific. Nausea happens in radiation sickness, but it also happens in heat illness, infection, stress, and motion. Fatigue happens in almost everything because fatigue is the body demanding fewer activities. Headache happens with altitude, dehydration, infection, tension, and lack of sleep. The body does not have a special symptom for every cause. It has a limited vocabulary spoken through tissues. That limitation is part of what makes invisible dangers tricky. You cannot always diagnose the cause by feel. You need instruments, context, and patience. So in a place like the zone, measurement becomes a kind of religion, not the mystical kind, the bureaucratic kind, the clip-on dosimeter, the personal dose record, the survey meter, the contamination wipe test, the lab analysis of soil samples. And you might think this is cold, turning human lives into data. But data is how you reduce guesswork. Guesswork is how you lose people. A dosimeter is a little time traveler. It tells you what happened while you were busy doing your task. Sometimes it tells you nothing unusual. Sometimes it tells you you stood in a hot spot longer than planned. Sometimes it tells you a story you wish you did not have. There are different ways to measure dose. Film badges, old but effective, darkening in response to radiation, thermoluminescent dosimeters, crystals that store energy and later release it as light when heated, electronic dosimeters that display a running tally. All of them are trying to do one thing: turn invisible events into a number you can manage. But numbers can be mishandled too. If you underreport, you send people back in too soon. If you overreport, you may waste limited workforce and time. And if you lie, you can make a disaster quieter on paper while it stays loud in bodies. So, the science is never isolated from the system around it. Even the best detector cannot protect you from bad decisions. Now, let the focus soften from humans to materials again, because another invisible force is simply chemistry. Doing what chemistry does. Concrete absorbs water. Water carries ions. Ions move through pores. Freeze-thaw cycles crack surfaces. Corrosion eats metal. In a place like Chernobyl, time does not only reduce radiation through decay. Time also opens containers, breaks barriers, and makes old structures leak. A sealed trench can become less sealed when roots push through. A roof can collapse and release trapped dust. A drainage system can clog and pool contaminated sediment. So management is not optional. It is a long, tired relationship with entropy. Entropy is the tendency for useful order to degrade, not because the universe is mean, but because there are more ways to be messy than neat. If you build a wall, it wants to become rubble. If you build a containment structure, it wants to become a maintenance schedule. If you build a society, it wants to become distracted. That is why the new safe confinement matters. It is an arch that keeps weather out and dust in, buying time again. But buying time means paying interest, inspections, ventilation control, humidity management to reduce corrosion, crane systems inside to dismantle old debris remotely. It is engineering as a long apology letter written in steel. And if you are the kind of person who lies awake thinking about the far future, there is a weirder problem. How do you warn people 10,000 years from now? Not because they are stupid, but because languages change, symbols change, cultures change. A hazard sign that seems obvious today might look like decoration later. So, nuclear waste management has inspired strange research into semiotics, the study of signs and meaning, designing markers that communicate danger across millennia, spikes in forbidding landscapes, monuments that feel unpleasant to approach, messages encoded in multiple languages and pictograms. Even then, you cannot guarantee comprehension. Humans are curious, and curiosity is not always survivable. Congratulations, your species digs up everything eventually. Now you can feel the connective thread. Radiation is not unique in being invisible. It is unique in the timescales it forces you to respect. Heat can kill in hours. Cold can kill in a night. Pressure can kill in minutes. But certain isotopes ask you to think in decades and centuries, and your brain resists, because your brain is a short-term planner. living in a long-term universe. So you cope by shrinking the story back down, back to a shift, back to a task, back to a rule. Do not eat the mushrooms. Do not drink the untested milk. Do not linger near that drainage ditch. Walk on the path. Wash the boots. Check the meter. These are small actions, and they matter because they are repeatable. Repeatability is how humans survive long problems. Now, speaking of long problems, return to the idea of everyday radiation again, but tilt it towards something practical, radon. Because radon is the background hazard that behaves a little like contamination. It is a gas, so it moves. It seeps through cracks in foundations. It accumulates in basements and low rooms, especially in winter when houses are sealed. Radon itself decays into short-lived progeny, little particles that can stick to dust. When inhaled, those decay products can lodge in the lungs and emit alpha radiation close to tissue. The risk is still a probability game, not a guaranteed outcome. But radon is one of the largest sources of natural radiation dose for many people, and the fix is beautifully boring. Test kits, ventilation, sealing cracks, sub-slab depressurization systems that pull radon from under the house and vent it outside, a fan, a pipe, and the acceptance that airflow is sometimes the best medicine. It is hard to make that cinematic, which is why it often gets ignored. Now, one more quiet, invisible force, the kind that feels like a philosophical insult. Ionizing radiation is only one band of the electromagnetic spectrum. Ultraviolet from the sun is also radiation, just less energetic than gamma rays. You can feel its effects later. As sunburn. Sunburn is DNA damage too, mostly in skin cells. Your body responds with inflammation, redness, peeling, repair. Sometimes mutations persist, and skin cancers can grow years later. Again, delayed bills. Again. A system that feels unfair. But because sunlight is familiar, people treat it as normal. They tan on purpose, like they are negotiating with biology through fashion. Meanwhile, they